It should be just available material consistent across that chip spreader. Right? Sometimes we see over-application of chips. And if you're paying by the ton for a chip seal, if you're paying by ton for aggregate, and you're paying by gallon or pound for asphalt, you have a problem there in that the contractor really doesn't have an incentive to control that application rate on the chips, right? Because they're getting paid for those tons. So you might want to think about how you pay things and how that impacts them. On the other side, if you pay by the square yard, you have to make sure you get the minimum amount you specify. Roll with a pneumatic roller. If you're using rapid set emulsions, same day or next morning sweeping. Chips are not magically going to embed themselves into the asphalt a week later. It's just not going to happen. Once that asphalt has set up, those extra chips aren't helping you out. We do have some folks doing fog seals over chip seals. It can help to improve that chip retention a little bit. It gives a dark colored surface appearance, which your customers often like. That's in a rural road fog seal over chip seal. Slurry seal. This is a truck mounted mixture of, so you got a truck mounted mixer, fine aggregate, similar to chip seal aggregate, a little smaller, some dust, some mineral filler, sometimes it's Portland cement. Emulsified asphalt and water. We mix it all together on a truck and we spread it out the back of the truck onto the pavement. It looks like this. It has that kind of milk chocolate color when it's first put out. This is the start of this pass, and it's a little bit too wet because you see this drain off of material on the edge. You really don't want to see that. That's cured out material up on the top where the two workers are walking. That was placed the previous evening. So we're mixing all these products together. We're putting them in a spreader box in the back of the truck. That's what the aggregates look like. That's what the asphalt emulsion looks like. You can vary the size a little bit, basically to match the roughness of the surface texture. It cures through water evaporating out of this surface. So it's going to take several hours for this to cure out. So if it's a slurry seal, it is environmental cure, evaporation of water. So you need to do good traffic control. Contractor needs to do good traffic control to keep people from driving on this. How many people have done slurry seals? Okay, all right. You have problems with traffic getting on and getting tire marks on it, tire tracks on it. Okay. Look at your traffic control. Coordinate well with your contractors. Make sure that traffic control is a pay item, right? People know you're serious about it if you're actually paying for it, right? If it's not just incidental to the contract. Another example there, you don't need that many people working, that was a demonstration. And this is just showing a little demonstration of how the material should look. Right? The bottom one there is about how that material should look. It shouldn't be as dry as you see on the left and the top, and it's way too wet on the right. So maybe 2 to 8 hours, depending on your environmental conditions, you're going to get this open, and a little bit depending on the mix design. I think we've talked about traffic control, coordination. Coordination with all the folks who are going to be driving on that road typically, school buses, postal service, a city bus route, garbage collection, all those things you need to think about coordinating as you're setting that project up. An example on a city street finished on the right side, and just again an example of the product as it has just been placed and as it's already set. Microsurfacing is like a high-tech slurry seal. There's a chemical reaction that happens in the cure, so it's actually going to be driving that water out. And I'd say 1 to 2 hours opening time. Your contractor's going to say, well, I can get that open in 15 minutes. Right? And so good weather, we're being really aggressive on it. Yeah, we may be able to put cross traffic across an intersection after we pull an intersection in that 15 minutes. But generally figure an hour or two. Because that temperature and humidity are still going to have some impact. Because it sets up so quick, you can't hand work it really easily. So it's best for long straight runs. So cul-de-sacs don't work really well for this product. We can use it to fill ruts, which is typically more of a county and state DOT concern than a city street concern, but we have these issues sometimes, especially at intersections where we have a lot of trucks. So we can put multiple layers in a rut and build this material up, which we can't really do with the slurry because the slurry needs to be able to have that evaporation of the water out. Then we have some other options. We have the Cape Seal. Cape Seal is a combination of a couple of treatments we just talked about. Has anybody used this? Okay. What was your experience with Cape Seal?
Pretty expensive for
Yep.
the product that you get in the end.
Mm-hmm. the reason it's expensive is we have two applications, one on top of the other, and they're two different products, so it takes different equipment for each one. So you have two mobilizations of equipment, and what you're essentially doing is you're taking a chip seal, and then you're putting a slurry seal or a microsurfacing on top of it. So you get the advantage of the good sealing properties of that chip seal. You get a wearing surface that's slurry or microsurfacing. But cost-wise, you can basically take the cost of a slurry and add the cost of take the cost of a chip seal and add the cost of a slurry or microsurfacing, and that's going to be your cost to do the combination.
So then, has there been any improvements to the slurry seal? Because in the past, the problem was that in winter, when the snowplow went, it will sort of scrape in the middle.
Losing a lot of fine material in the. You know, I've seen some slurry seals that were done. In fact, I live on a street that had a slurry seal done a number of years ago, and the entire slurry seal is gone at this point. And I mean, it's really beyond its life. But some of that was coming off the first year, and in fact, on a hot day, when tires, when you did like turned with not moving, so you know that kind of what we call a power steering mark, where you're at the end of the driveway and you're cranking the wheel but you're not moving. We were getting those in that slurry a year after it was placed. That tells me there was a material problem, right? That should not happen. So if you're seeing a lot of early material loss, that may have been a problem specifically with that emulsion or with that mix design. You are going to get a little bit of lose a little bit of the fine material from the plowing. But if you're seeing a lot of material loss, that may be an issue specifically with that mix that was placed. The microsurfacing, they're kind of getting to the point where it's almost hard to tell sometimes where slurry seal ends and microsurfacing begins. Because you take a slurry seal and you put polymer modified asphalt into it, you improve it. And so the line is getting blurred a little bit. I think the technology is a lot better now than it was 15 years ago, 20 years ago. And so it would be something worth looking at again. If you haven't been doing it because you had a bad experience. Almost every one of these treatments, I can think of a situation where someone has said, well, we're not going to do that again because we had a failure. Right? You can fail any of these. Put a slurry or a microsurfacing down in October on a cool, damp day. Real good chance of failure, okay? Same thing with the chip seal. We lose, when you look at wear on a chip seal, the top of the crown, where the snowplow is riding on that crown, is where we're going to lose that chip seal first as well. It may not be as noticeable as it is maybe on the slurry. It's more noticeable if you have pavement markings right on the crown too, because you'll start to lose some of the pavement marking as well. Comment or question?
When you're looking at doing a surface treatment,
Yes.
you've got X amount of roads, you've got X amount of dollars, and you go out and you say, I'm going to do a surface treatment on, for me it's 7s and 8s.
Okay.
On the facing.
Mm-hmm.
When I look at those roads, I don't have enough to do a surface treatment on all of them.
Right.
So I have two choices. I can use some type of a liquid surface treatment, which to me is stopping UV degradation of the road.
And sealing water.
And sealing off
Right.
water, but
Right.
I'm putting a treatment over to hopefully slow those oils from evaporating.
Right.
An effect of that road drying out are cracks.
Right. And usually the first ones are transverse cracks across the road.
Cracks.
Yep.
And then I know that a year from now, if I have two transverse cracks that are 30 feet apart, I'm gonna have another one at 15. It's gonna be in the middle of that. And then it's gonna be in the middle of those two, so I can kind of see that. So when I'm trying to choose the best
Candidate?
dollar spent,
Okay.
are you better off looking at a road and saying, look, I'm gonna get all the cracks filled and then surface treatment what I can? Or a combination, what's the best?
You definitely want to get all the cracks filled. All right. So if you are saying, I don't have enough budget to do surface treatments on all of the things that are good candidates this year, I would make sure that I get them all sealed. Okay.
Even if I had a road that was a 9, but it had some traverse cracks.
Yep.
I wanna go out and,
What I say on crack sealing is as soon as you have enough cracks that it makes sense to mobilize a crew, you should do your crack sealing. Right? Because once you have that crack, that's a point for entry of water into your base, and that's going to accelerate deterioration of the pavement. It's also going to accelerate with freeze thaw, it's going to accelerate the deterioration of the crack as well. So if we can seal that crack early, we want to do that. And so if I'm saying, you know, the choice between sealing and microsurfacing over 50% of it, or crack sealing 100% of it and micro sealing 30% of it, I'd make sure I crack seal 100% of it. That would be my recommendation on that. Yes?
So in our urban area, we're starting to increase the frequency of our crack sealing, kind of getting away from the surface treatments.
Okay.
From a dollars and cents perspective, we think our dollars better spent
Okay.
increasing the frequency of our crack seals.
Okay.
Because if you do a surface treatment, that next year or the year after, you're still gonna get those cracks. And it has to be crack filled or redone or whatever. So we're
Well,
just, every 2
yeah.
years, we're starting to crack fill our
Okay.
roads.
That would make sense. You're going back where you've had additional cracks appear,
Yeah.
and you're going back and resealing areas where if you've gotten failure, correct?
A touch-up, if you
Right.
will.
Okay.
Or even a partial depth going over it. I mean, if you look at a 15-year life cycle of a road, and
Mhm.
say, if I don't do a surface treatment, what would it cost me to come in and do a 2-inch mill and overlay?
I can tell you that everything I've looked at research-wise would tell me that I'm money ahead to do surface treatments periodically versus not doing anything and then waiting to year 15 and mill and overlay.
When you say not do anything, do you? I
And
mean,
then
if you're
there's the
doing
question
it-
of, your next question is, well, what if I just crack seal over the 15 years? And then that gets to be a little harder. But you mentioned that, you know, by doing that surface treatment, you are also delaying the progression of the cracks, getting more transverse cracks, getting other cracking like block cracking. So if I just did sealing of transverse cracks, eventually I'd expect to see other cracks like an aging crack, like a block crack. Right? Those are going to occur as well. Initially, you can seal those. Eventually, those get smaller and you can't seal those.
So spending money on the surface treatments, is that gonna buy me 3 or 4 more years? Is that money well spent?
That's
Generally, yes. Generally, it is. Everything that I've looked research-wise, that is the best approach.
If you're in a rural township and you're looking at a road that was paved 25 years ago, that was virgin asphalt. If you look at asphalt 10 years ago and the mixes they were using, I think the roads that were paved last year in the same cycle will have a longer life than the roads that were paved 10 years ago. Because the
And
recycled
that,
asphalt.
the reason that's going to be primarily is because of the use of the asphalt cement materials that we're using now. So looking at the PG graded asphalts, which are asphalts that are graded based on the high temperature and the low temperature we're going to experience in our area. And so if you're specifying the right PG grade, and typically in our climate that's going to put us to a polymer modified liquid asphalt in that mixture, that's going to better resist that transverse cracking. It's going to take it longer for that pavement to age to the point. Oops, I'm getting excited about this. Let's see what happens. And that's not my pointer that I just broke either. All right. See how I did it. We're still working. But so that helps us out. So I would agree with you. You know, performance graded asphalt material that was placed recently probably is going to be a better performer than something prior to the time we were doing that. We have other issues like recycled asphalt.
Yeah.
The percent of recycled asphalt may have some impact. There's other research that I see that says, well, as long as you stay within certain parameters, you're fine. Putting shingles in, if that's not done right, if we recycled shingles, that asphalt is stiffer, more brittle. So you have to change your mix design to accommodate that. So you're changing grades of asphalt. So yeah, you have to look at your new products that you're putting down and trying to get the most performance out of those as well. So, and if you have a pavement that has performed subpar, you know, you overlaid it 10 years ago and you got very early deterioration, as I said, you're going to have different strategies for that road than you're going to have for some others. You might take one and you go, wow, it's 5 years and I got an incredible amount of cracking and raveling and this just really isn't performing well. I'm gonna cut my losses on that, and I'm not gonna spend a lot of money on that, because I know a few years down the road, I'm gonna do something more major to it, I'm gonna mill it off. And so that's a decision you make based on the condition of that particular pavement. All right, so here's Cape Seal. Another one that, again, was not something we were typically doing in Wisconsin, but we're starting to see some of, is a scrub seal. This is something you'd look at for more cracked pavements. So this would be something you could do on the 5. You're basically gonna flood that surface with liquid asphalt, and through brooms or squeegees, you're gonna be pushing that material into the cracks. This is showing it on a rural road. I have seen photos, videos of it being done on curb and gutter streets. Contractor obviously has to do a good job of controlling the flow of that liquid material, so it's not spilling out into your curb flag, or your gutter flag. But we still, we can seal up cracks with this because we can push that asphalt down into the cracks. We're basically applying a chip over the top, so it's somewhat similar to a chip seal. Rolling it, sweeping off excess, all that looks just like a chip seal. But we are applying, in some cases, a higher application rate. We can actually use a aggregate that has a little more dust in it. They're saying, the people promoting this saying it can fill cracks up to 1/2 inch wide. There is some work that needs to be done to make sure the emulsion can handle being, pushed and scrubbed like that and not break. I don't know if I have time. Well, I'll try it. On that here. Yeah, I have time to show this. I'm actually moving along at a pretty good clip here. Sorry about the music. I didn't pick the music out. I didn't play my banjo. Now, that's an ugly pavement, right? And I don't know, I might want to do something different than a scrub seal on this. But if you look at it, that's basically a very severely severely deteriorated block crack pavement. But this will show you the process. As soon as we get beyond the intro here, wish I could fast forward it.
I find nothing wrong with this banjo.
I want to get to the actual process here. We've seen enough of the condition of the road. And that's kind of ugly. I would be doing some fold-out patching on that before I would do anything to it. But this is what they chose to demonstrate on it. So you see, you have this little setup with these brooms at different angles, and that gets placed on the pavement. You're flooding it with asphalt in front of that, and you're basically scrubbing the asphalt into the cracks. Then standard chip spreader kind of setup. See here, they're doing it adjacent to the curb and gutter. Although interestingly, they're leaving a little short here, which I don't quite understand. And so you can see, we have kind of a head of material here. We've got liquid asphalt in front, and it's trying to push that into the pavement. And after that, it's a chip seal process. So this is a product you could think about using on that road that is really kind of a little bit too far gone, but you're trying to get some additional life out of it with the treatment, because it will do a little bit more in terms of sealing the cracks.
But it's gotta be expensive.
Well, if you look at it, what are the differences between this and a chip seal? Higher asphalt application rate, one slightly different piece of equipment because we had that broom in there. Otherwise, it's basically chip seal equipment. So any of your contractors who are doing chip seal ought to be able to do this. But I would expect that you're going to be spending a little more on liquid asphalt because you're putting more of that into cracks. And so it should be a little more expensive, but it's not like we have a second train of equipment and a second mobilization. You saw enough of that, right? All right. So this is from a handbook from Iowa State University, but it's kind of looking at all of these treatments, or many of these treatments. One here that you're going to hear about after my part of this session, thin overlays, and it's saying, when are these appropriate? Green checks are it's appropriate, red X's are it's not appropriate or not recommended, and the arrows are supposed to be at the marginal. I would argue with some of these. You know, by seal coat, they mean what we refer to as a chip seal, and they're saying it's marginal above 2,000 vehicles per day. Well, we can go over to Minnesota and they'll chip seal on state highways and interstates. I mean, you know, this ADT level, yeah, you can do this on higher traffic roads. Otherwise, a lot of this makes some sense. You wouldn't fog seal on bleeding because you wouldn't have the additional aggregate to take up any of that excess asphalt. You know, a chip seal is not going to cure rutting. Slurry seal probably should have an X there, not a green check, because really you need a microsurfacing to take care of the rutting. But it gives you an idea. We want to select the treatment based on the conditions we have, select the appropriate treatment that's going to work. Our tendency is we want to have a program where we have maybe crack sealing, one surface treatment, and overlay, and those are the things we do, right? It's simple, it's easier. But what we really need to be thinking about is, let's match up a treatment to what the conditions are on that pavement. And that's all I have in my part of the presentation. Any more questions? I know I went pretty quickly through some of that. I do have a couple minutes to take questions before we jump into the next part. Yes?
How much can you build up that microsurface in the rutting? What's the maximum?
About 2 inches. Yeah. You're going to do multiple lifts. Okay. So you're probably going to, if you're filling a deep rut, you're going to do a couple of passes in the rut, and then really any kind of rut filling, my preference would be then we're going to do a treatment over the top of it. So even if I was taking like a sand mix, hot mix asphalt, and I'm doing a rut fill with it, you know, I have a problem with raveling at the edges of the rut fill, so I still want to put some kind of treatment over the top to seal that edge in. So a couple of passes on a deep rut, and then surface over the top.
Is part of the sell on microsurfacing that it's, I hate to use the word structural, but that it can bridge some small cracking longer than a chip seal?
That shouldn't be, because actually a microsurfacing is more, it's stiffer than a chip seal. And so actually in terms of my experience personally and what I know of the products, you're going to see that crack reflection as quickly or more quickly on that microsurfacing than you are on the chip seal.
So between microsurfacing and chip sealing, what is, I mean, microsurfacing is a chemical drag?
Microsurfacing is, again, it's everything is mixed together, applied to the surface, and there's a chemical reaction that's driving that curing, so it's driving that moisture out. And you know, with the chip seal or with the slurry seal, you are basically evaporating the water out of that emulsion. Now you have variations with different materials with emulsions. You have rapid set emulsions that cure out is going to happen pretty quickly. You have slower setting ones where it's going to take a longer period of time. So you can do some things with those products to get quicker setups.
So what's the end result for microsurfacing? Does it cost twice as much?
Cost twice as much. I can tell you, having had an experience where we switched from a chip seal to a microsurfacing on city streets in a place that I worked, it was basically driven by dissatisfaction with the chip seal process for some of the reasons that you mentioned earlier. Excess chips, bleeding, those types of things. Again, I have many more years experience now than I had at the time when I was involved in that. My first thing I would do now, that was so long ago that we were just switching to emulsions, all right? So it was like the Stone Age, right? What I would do now is I would look at my chip seal process and try to identify, do we have deficiencies in our spec, do we have deficiencies in our material, in our workmanship, that we can correct to get that to perform better. So I'd be looking at polymer modified emulsion, something like a CRS2P or something of that type, making sure that I have good cubicle stone, single size, not, like no dust, as little dust as possible, okay? And making sure that the application is done appropriately, making sure the mix design is correct so I have enough liquid asphalt to hold that stone in, making sure I'm not applying excess stone. I'd look at all that performance stuff, make sure I have that right, and then see if I could run a chip seal program that didn't get all the neighbors upset. And then if I can't do that, then I would look at the other options. Some folks would say, Well, I'd look at the microsurfacing on higher speed traffic, okay? So if you have an arterial street, they might say, let's look at the microsurfacing. Microsurfacing was originally developed in Germany for, high-speed freeway type of applications. So that is really what it was initially intended for. Yes.
So where would slurry seal fit in? It does provide a very nice surface, but
Right.
it has some issues. And
Mhm.
do you think those issues are addressed now, and one could go back to it? I don't know cost-wise. how do you
I think that with the emulsion products we have now and with the polymer modification, I think that a lot of that has been addressed. If the people doing the mixture design and the application are doing things properly, a lot of that should be addressed. So it's hard for me to comment on, specific projects and why there might have been a failure. I gave an example where I have some opinions that there was a material issue on that particular product. And that was many years ago. If they had the right materials at the time, if they didn't have an issue with the materials, it might have lasted a lot longer. So it's certainly something that is working. People are doing it and it's effective. All of these products you're going to get somewhere from snowplows. So eventually you're going to see snowplow wear. I would expect that snowplow wear to start at the top of the crown. Okay. If I'm seeing wear in the wheel paths, so I got 2 stripes down each side where it's wearing out, where the tires are hitting the road, that's not something I would expect to see on a slurry or a microsurface. So if you're seeing that, that's really early wear that I wouldn't expect to see. Other
Let's not
questions?
see, go ahead.
You get to go first because you put your hand up.
So it's nice to think about a toolbox
Mhm.
of different techniques, but if you have a certain budget you have to live with,
Right.
and you want to try 5 different things, each of those 5 different things is going to be kind of small,
Mhm.
and you're going to pay a premium because you lose your economy of
Okay.
scale.
Well, then let's think about maybe a group like this could think about that, and I'll get to your comment.
With this,
And, are there ways we could work together and put a contract together for a certain treatment that, you have 3 or 4 neighboring communities that all want to try it, but you don't want to do a lot of it initially? Because if you can package more work together, as long as it's not so far apart that the contractor needs a separate site, because in each of these they're going to need some place to stockpile material and park equipment. So if you could provide 4 communities get together and you could provide one site where they can stage, that they can easily reach all those locations, and you package your stuff together. Of course, you have to work out the logistics of who's going to administer that contract and how money's going to change hands and make sure you're okay with all the purchasing requirements and all those things. But that may be an opportunity where you can work together on that. And I think, from the state government side, they're looking for us to be more innovative. They're looking for us to do more things, in a cost-effective way. And that may be an approach to doing that.
Sounds like a great idea, guys, doesn't it?
I wasn't paid
Yeah,
to say
working
that.
together. No, working together will make a difference. So,
there's enough municipalities around. We did some chip seal roads last year, and I went through and did photos. We're gonna really watch and see how it does. The microsurfacing versus chip seal. If you're in a smaller municipality, call Monona, call Middleton, Sun Prairie. Odds are we've tried something, and you can at least get a start. You'll get a feel on price, you'll get a feel on the longevity of it before you maybe have to go out and spend that money. So you can always contact bigger municipalities.
Okay, let's give Ben a round of applause. There was a sign-in sheet that was circulating in the back of the room and trying to work its way forward, so if you have it, you can keep advancing it. We would appreciate that. Go ahead.
All right, thank you very much. Good afternoon. My name is Brandon Strand. I'm the Executive Director for the Wisconsin Asphalt Pavement Association. Appreciate the invitation here this afternoon. This is a topic that we've been doing a lot of presentations on at our annual meetings throughout the state, but also to a lot of local units of government, cities, counties, groups like this where we can get more bang for our buck, so to speak, with getting information out to a lot of different local units of government at the same time. So appreciate the invitation to be here. I think Ben did a really good job kind of kicking off this workshop, talking about a lot of the surface treatments that are available to you. Couple comments that came up, you know, concerns and criticisms of chip seals. We hear a lot of that at the association as well. Ben mentioned the fog seal application as a alternative surface treatment. A lot of times we see the fog seal applications put directly over the top of a chip seal, as Ben mentioned. But one of the reasons that's done is it will address a lot of that kick up of those loose stones. So if you're seeing and getting a lot of the complaints about chip seals, consider that fog seal application. That's something that will address a lot of those concerns. When the DOT does do chip seals, they'll generally do a fog seal application to help with a lot of those loose stones and kick up. What were some of the other things? We'll talk about, we'll compare a lot of those different treatments that Ben mentioned, talk about right place, right time for a lot of those applications here in a little bit, which may be helpful to you. We'll talk about the life extension, the life of a chip seal versus the life of a microsurface or a slurry seal. That'll help give you a better idea of maybe why a microsurface costs more than a chip seal does, because some instances it's going to last you a little bit longer. Not only is the emulsion that's being put down more so than it may be for a chip seal, but it may last you longer. So you'll see some of that information in our slide. We'll compare and contrast some cost differences for you guys as well. So we'll talk about the cost of a chip seal versus a microsurface, the cost of a thin overlay or a thin asphalt overlay versus a chip seal. Kind of give you guys a better idea of what some of these applications are going to cost you if you want to try those. But before we get into a lot of that, how many of you are familiar with the Wisconsin Asphalt Pavement Association? We got 2, 3, okay, a handful, that's awesome. What I want to do is just spend 5 minutes, kind of break up the, talk about surface treatments and managing and maintaining your roadways. Talk about our association a little bit. Mostly because a lot of the surface treatments that we're talking about, our contractors don't do. We're a statewide nonprofit association made up of asphalt contractors.